Hello everyone, welcome to my May 2018 haul video. This is my May 2018 haul video, and if you're not familiar with this video series that I do on my channel, it is essentially what the title suggests. I go through all the things I picked up in a specific month. This happens to be May of this year. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. And the first thing I have up here are two graphic novels. They are both of the same title, and that is Paper Girls Volume 2 and Paper Girls Volume 3. If you're curious, I picked both of these up on Free Comic Book Day, which is the first Saturday of every May, and I decided to pick these up because my local comic book store was having a sale. I believe buy one, get one 50% off, and these were two that I needed. If you're not familiar with this series, this is written by Brian K. Vaughan, who also does the Saga comic that I'm a big fan of. If you've seen a bunch of my video updates, you know that I pick up all of those volumes as well. I have volume 1 already, so I decided to pick up these two. These are also put out by Image Comics, which is great because their paperbacks are extremely affordable and are readily able to be found. Next up here are two books that I found at my local Barnes & Noble. I was just browsing around it randomly when I stumbled upon their bargain section, which, if you happen to stumble upon it, check it out because you never know what you're going to be able to find. The first up here is John le Carré's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and I've been actually looking to get all of John le Carré's novels. All about the character of George Smiley. This was famously made into a movie, I think that came out in 2011, starring Gary Oldman as the character of George Smiley, where he was nominated for the first time in his career for his portrayal of that character. And the second up here is a Star Wars novel that came out a few years ago. It is part of the brand new canon, and that is Star Wars Lost Stars. This is written by Claudia Gray, who has written a couple of novels in the new canon. As you can see here, I got both of these at a very, very good price that I was shockingly happy with in the store. Next up here are a series of used books that I picked up at my local used bookstore. The first up here is actually a play by August Wilson, Fences, which I'm sure many of you are aware of now because of the film that came out a couple of years ago that was directed and starring Denzel Washington. It was also the film that got Viola Davis her first Oscar. Next up here is Patricia Highsmith's The Talented Mr. Ripley. As you probably also know, this was also turned into a movie several years ago, directed by the late Anthony Minghella, starring a very young Matt Damon, as well as Jude Law and Gwyneth Paltrow. Next up here is Toni Morrison's Sulla. Toni Morrison is a Nobel Prize winning author. She is just absolutely phenomenal. She has been writing books pretty much since the 70s all the way up till now. They are just one of the most fantastic books you'll ever read. I highly recommend checking her out if you haven't already. Next up here is another John le Carré novel, and that is Our Kind of Traitor. Yet again, to go with my ever-growing John le Carré collection that I'm actually just starting. Next up here is Mindy Kaling's first book, Is Everyone Hanging Out Without Me? This is a book I've been actually wanting to get for a few years and was really happy to finally get. And finally, this is another book that got turned into a movie. You can definitely see the pattern that goes into my book buying tendencies, and that is Revolutionary Road. This is, of course, the book that was turned into a movie directed by Sam Mendes, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. If you have not seen the movie, I highly recommend it. If you have not read the book, I also recommend it as well. And now we get to the main part, or the bulk of my haul videos, and that is all of the movies or Blu-rays or DVDs that I pick up in a specific month. And starting off here is a Twilight Time release of Where the Sidewalk Ends. This is a film noir that was the reteaming of the same director and acting duo from one of my favorite film noirs of all time in Laura. This is directed by Otto Preminger, starring Gene Tierney and Dana Andrews. This is not quite as good as Laura, but I highly recommend checking it out if you are a fan of the actors and director involved, as well as a fan of Laura in and of itself. Next up here is currently my favorite movie of the year, and this is the 4K Ultra HD edition of Annihilation, directed by Alex Garland. This edition is exclusive to Best Buy until October, which I thought is kind of crazy to me. This is a fantastic, surreal sci-fi movie. It's awesome. Check out my review if you haven't already. And next up here is one of the most critically acclaimed films from last year, and that is I, Tonya, starring Margot Robbie. This is the film that dramatizes the whole Tonya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan thing from the 1990s, definitely taking more of a artistic license when it comes to depicting the Tonya Harding character, but Margot Robbie is fantastic in this film. Next up here is a bit of a cult classic, or a new cult classic, and that is Taika Waititi's What We Do in the Shadows. This is a great horror mockumentary about vampires and werewolves. You are probably more familiar with Taika Waititi now than when this film actually came out, because he just directed the new Thor film in Thor Ragnarok, and that got rave reviews, and it is a hell of a fun watch if you haven't seen that one already. And next up here is not the best movie, certainly within this director's filmography, and it's probably not the best movie of all the movies I'm going to show you, but that is Kevin Smith's Yoga Hosers. This is a movie that I had to add to the collection because I've expressed this a couple of times before. I'm a huge fan of director Kevin Smith. He is a big influence and inspiration for me, so I owe it to him to at least get all of his movies into my collection. And next is one of the last films from the late James Gandolfini, and that is The Drop, which also stars Tom Hardy. This is a film I actually have not seen yet, but I've been wanting to see it for years, pretty much just to see all of the movies that James Gandolfini made right before he passed away. Next up here is another Twilight Time release, and it's a film I haven't seen, but I know it is very critically loved and loved amongst many people I know, and that is Steel Magnolias. This is something that I was shocked to find for so cheap, and the cast in this movie is incredible. The cast of this movie is Julia Roberts, Sally Field, Shirley MacLaine, Olympia Dukakis, Dolly Parton, Daryl Hannah. This is a massive female powerful cast. I can't wait to finally delve into this movie and see what I've been missing over all these years. Next up here is The Monuments Men. This was directed and starring George Clooney. George Clooney is actually a great director. At least his early filmography was very good. His recent fare, not so much. I hear this is not a great movie. I haven't seen it yet. He seems to be really taking a lot of influence from the Coen brothers recently and trying to make his own Coen brothers-esque movies. And next is another critically acclaimed movie from last year. It was certainly one of my favorites. It was in my top 15, not quite my top 10, and that is Lady Bird, directed by Greta Gerwig and starring Saoirse Ronan. This was a directorial debut for Greta Gerwig in a way. If you haven't seen my review that I did of this movie yet, please check that out. This is a great movie, especially if you were a teenager in the early 2000s like myself. You definitely connect to this movie in a very personal way. Next up here is a Warner Archive release, and that is The Battle of Cable Hogue. This was directed by Sam Peckinpah, came out in the 1970s, starring Jason Robards. This is one of those kind of dirty westerns from the 70s that I really like. Sam Peckinpah kind of changed the western genre when it came to the American western, and I highly recommend checking this out. And the last up here of this pile, and certainly one many of you probably know, this is the 4K UHD release of Black Panther. This is one of the best movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend checking it out. Also, check out my review that I did for it if you haven't already. The last pile of Blu-rays that I have here are all from Kino Lorber Studio Classics. Kino Lorber Studio Classics was having a sale on their website for the month of May where a lot of their titles were 50% off or more, and I picked up 7 of those titles. These were all titles that I've been looking to get but waiting for the price to drop to a reasonable amount, and they all definitely met that criteria. First up here is Joan of Arc, starring Ingrid Bergman. If you're not already aware of this, Ingrid Bergman is my favorite actress of all time, so I'm slowly making my way to getting all of her movies. Speaking of Ingrid Bergman, next up here is Intermezzo, starring both Ingrid Bergman and Leslie Howard. This, I believe, was her first Hollywood movie. She had done a bunch of movies in Sweden beforehand that are all being put out by Criterion in an Eclipse set that I think is actually already available, so I'll definitely be picking that up in the future. Next up here is I'll Be Seeing You, starring Ginger Rogers, Joseph Cotten, and Shirley Temple. This is a film that I've seen before and I rather liked a lot, so I definitely had to pick this up. Next up here is actually an upgrade from a DVD that I have, and that is The Lion in Winter, starring Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole, and a very young Anthony Hopkins is in this movie as well. This film is just astonishing. The acting in this movie, the dialogue in this movie, I think is on another level. It's very play-like, and the actors I think are doing some of their best work. I think Peter O'Toole is just an amazing actor. Katharine Hepburn has always been one of my favorites. I highly recommend watching this movie. I think it's super underrated, and a lot of people don't talk about it. The next movie here is a bit of a blind buy in the sense that I have never seen it before or even heard about it before, but I really like the actors and actresses that are in it, so I thought I would pick it up. And that is Since You Went Away, which stars Claudette Colbert, Jennifer Jones, Joseph Cotten, Shirley Temple, Lionel Barrymore. This is a film that is very long, running 177 minutes. It's a wartime drama, so I'm definitely curious to check it out. I really love all of those people that are involved in it. Next up here is a film that I know is one of Martin Scorsese's favorite movies because I've seen him talk about it a couple of times, and that is Duel in the Sun. This is a Western from 1946. Starring Jennifer Jones, Gregory Peck, and Joseph Cotten. This film deals with kind of a love triangle. This is a great Western in my opinion. I think one of the original titles of this movie was called Lust in the Dust, which I think is just an amazing title. And last but definitely not least is actually a volume of a television series, and that is the Pink Panther cartoon Volume 1. I was someone who grew up with the Pink Panther cartoons as well as the Blake Edwards movies, starring Peter Sellers, so I've been waiting years and years to finally get this. These episodes have been available on DVD for a while, but I heard rumblings for years now that they were coming to Blu-ray, and I'm glad I waited. So that has been my May 2018 haul video. If you want to see anything in any more depth, please let me know so that I can make a separate review about it, or that I could discuss it with you in the comments below. And once again, if you like these videos, please check out the other videos on my channel.